How old's your son?
Yeah, which son?
The 22-year-old. Yeah, the 18-year-old's just now beginning to listen to podcasts, but the 22 is into them, and he's constantly telling Dad, "You got to listen to this," and I'm like, "Yeah, you got to like, can I have a nice little button on my phone that I can just hit?" And he just rolls
Yeah,
his eyes.
yeah, we're live. Welcome to the Lovecraft Using podcast. Uh, as most of my audience knows, I usually do this Sundays at 6 p.m. Eastern. Uh, but what was it, 2 Sundays ago, Rich? You were going to be on Sunday, and then my mom, she's 75, fell and shattered her ankle. And the first thing I wanted to say was, I appreciate you rescheduling and
Oh,
asking about her. It was a very, very kind thing to do.
oh, of course,
So
of course.
yeah, I appreciate it.
Yeah, I don't know if you remember, but you've rescheduled for me a time or two. We've been doing
Oh
this.
yeah,
We've been trying to do like a
one
year
time
or
I
so.
think you had accidentally scheduled with me when your younger son was going off to college, if I
Yeah, no,
remember right.
my older son.
That
Yeah,
was your
it
older
was my
son.
older son. He was going off or we were going on visits. I don't know. It wasn't that long ago because he just graduated. So yeah, it was probably the weekend we were taking him or whatever.
Well,
And
those fates have been conspiring against us, but we finally beat them. So
exactly.
so yeah, thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks for
Um,
asking me.
I'm Mike Davis. I don't know what my job title is. Um, Matt, you want to introduce yourself real quick, and then we'll
Sure, I'm
talk to
Matt
Rich.
Carpenter. My basic role here is for Mike to call me old, and also
That's
I
true.
help run the Lovecraft Easing movie night, which is Saturday nights.
Yeah, we're pretty informal if you can't tell already, Rich. So
I like that. Yeah, so am I. Whether you want me to be or not, I am.
yeah, no, I'm pretty informal. Um, so anyway, you just have you released any new books lately that we should talk about? Yeah,
Just the one in the background there, chasing the boogeyman. That's the only one.
yeah, Chasing
Thanks.
the Boogeyman. By the way, Rich, I think I don't know if I told you or not, but a few days from now, I will turn this into a regular audio podcast.
Okay,
It'll
cool.
be on iTunes and Spotify and so forth. And that's where the majority of the audience is. But usually we have a live audience, and uh, we have a lot of people who watch it later. But but that's the largest part of the audience. So
Yeah.
so when I hold this up, I'm thinking of them that because they can't see it. This book is called Chasing the Boogeyman by Richard Chizmar. And I first heard about this book, I don't know where, months and months ago. And it just immediately piqued my interest because of the metafiction thing that you were doing. And I thought, this sounds so interesting. And your publisher was kind enough to send me an arc. And so yeah, it's a really good book.
Thank you, man.
Uh, yeah. Before we get to your book, I was reading a little bit more about you online, since this is the first time we've officially met besides our video test. And you first got into writing, correct me if I'm wrong, or or where you became interested in writing when you were in high school and your teacher read The Monkey by Stephen King.
Yeah, he actually brought in photocopies of the monkey for us to read aloud in class. And yeah, that was life transforming because I had read some King before that, but I was a typical high school guy, girls, lacrosse, that kind of thing. And but when we read The Monkey in class, I got to see, firsthand. I got to witness kind of everyone's response to it. And typical 10th grade English class, usually what 15, 16-year-old boys and girls, they don't pay a whole lot of attention, but the entire class was captivated. I was just blown away. And I just remember when we were finished, I thought, I want to do this. I want to do this to people. And his name was Richard Gallagher, and he actually just emailed me yesterday or the day before to tell me he read the book, and we're still in touch, still see each other, and he tells me all the time that I give him too much credit, but that's not the case. I definitely owe him.
No, yeah, and I wanted to talk about that for a minute, especially since my wife is a high school English teacher. Um, she was an attorney, and then she didn't feel like she was making the difference that she wanted to make. She was a prosecutor,
That's
law and
neat.
order type thing. And so she's been teaching high school English for about 8 years. And, she's one of those teachers like you see in the movies. All the kids love her, but at the same time, she's firm and, keeps them where they need to be and so forth.
Right.
And I tell her all the time, you have no idea that something you say or do will affect a kid. And 20 years later, what you did that day or said that day is still affecting them. And that's what you said his name was, Mr. Gallagher, did for you.
Yeah, Richard. His name was Richard Gallagher. Yeah, he.
Yeah.
No, he made a big difference. He used to something else he did that that carried a lot of weight for a kid in high school was he would bring in. He knew I was a reader. He had taught my older sisters. He kind of knew the family through school, and he knew I was a big reader. And he brought in his own books from his own, personal library and allowed me to borrow those and suggested, certain titles. And I just remember as a 15-year-old kid in this, small working class town to have a teacher kind of show that special interest and then that trust. I still remember his books had his name written on the top of the pages it was just a cool thing. And again, it made a big impression on me. So yeah, he definitely had a lasting impact. And there were a couple teachers like that. So you're right. To tell your wife that, please tell her that from me too.
I tell her all the time, and it's a very rewarding job for her. So, and I don't think you're giving Mr. Gallagher too much credit. So
yeah, no, I did the same thing. He's like, you thanked me in 3 or 4 books, and you're always thanking me in interviews. And I'm like, look, there's 2 of those moments that I can kind of, look back at from the earlier years, and you're one of them. So no, absolutely.
Well, this time you can say, yeah, well, the guy who interviewed me brought it up this time, so it's not my fault.
That's right. Yeah, hopefully he secretly, likes it. I'm sure it's gratifying for him because, teachers don't get enough credit.
No, they don't, but at least they're paid a lot, right?
Yeah, exactly. At least they're wealthy.
Yeah, at least they all make a lot of money, and that's
have their summers off.
Yeah. Well, those summers are getting shorter and shorter, and
Yes,
and she still has to plan for the following year, and so yeah. It's just really amazing how one moment in a person's life or one day can, I don't know if changing the course of your life is putting it too strongly, but I wonder if your teacher had not read that story that day or any time that year, if you would be doing what you're doing. I mean, maybe you would be, maybe you would have found a different path and got to it eventually. I don't know.
Yeah,
But,
I don't know. I'll tell you the exact moment where what you're saying kind of struck home for me. And to be honest, it kind of terrified me because I thought, oh my God, what if these things didn't happen? I was given a talk at a local library in Jaredsville, Maryland. And, I never really prepare anything. I kind of just go and wing it. And this crowd kind of didn't know a lot about, the background. So I gave them the chronological background from, starting when I was 8 or 9 and I was writing, war and monster stories and up in my bedroom and scaring my friends. I was always the one telling scary stories in the neighborhood, that kind of thing, to high school and Richard Gallagher's photocopies of the monkey, which by the way, came from Cavalier magazine. That's what he told me. He's like, it came from a girly magazine. So therefore and it was like in chapbook form. So, and he actually years later at a dinner, he gave me the original chapbook that he pulled out of the magazine. So that was
oh,
neat.
that's nice.
And then I took him through college and I said, I kind of, even though I had that moment in high school, again, you drift away. I went to college on a lacrosse scholarship and had a girlfriend and, you're trying to go to classes and parties and all that stuff. So you kind of get away, from that, I kind of got away from the writing stuff again. And then my junior year, I got hurt and all of a sudden lacrosse was finished for me. And I remember I was very lost. I didn't know what was next for me. And it was when It came out in hardcover from Steve. And I remember I picked it up at the bookstore and for 2 weeks, I was just, transformed to I was transported to Derry rather. And by the time I finished that, I was like, okay, it was a reminder. This is what I'm supposed to do. So it was like a week or two later, I was writing for the college newspaper. Probably a month after that, I started writing short stories and submitting them. And during this library talk, as I was doing all these, connecting the dots is essentially what I was doing. And then that third dot was when Steve actually, began to support Cemetery Dance. He gave us a promotional blurb, and then he sent us Chattery Teeth, a new story to publish. And that was in 91. And it just, as I was driving home from there, I remember thinking, holy, what if one of those things didn't happen? I really don't think I would be doing this, if I hadn't walked by that bookstore and seen this giant pyramid of hardcover It's and picked it up and took it back to my apartment and spent those 2 weeks in Derry, I don't know. Same thing with the monkey, kind of laying the foundation for it. And then again, same thing for Steve deciding to support this little magazine down in Maryland that he'd never heard of before with the weird name, it's slightly terrifying when I look back and I think, man, those pieces of the puzzle, if just one of them had kind of slipped away and got lost, I don't know what I'd be doing.
Yeah, I see what you're saying, but at the same time, we can't control so much of the time we can't control what happens to us, like you getting hurt, but we can control how we react to it. And look how you reacted to it. You made something good come out of it. Where that's not how everyone in the world would react. Some people wouldn't do that. So.
I'll be honest. It felt, and especially looking back, it felt like there was kind of something else. Not to go all new agey and on you, but it felt like there was something else kind of, guiding me on that path. So I'm just thankful for that. And there are, over the years there were a lot more of those dots that got connected, and a lot of them through hard work, but undeniably some through just good fortune and good karma, that kind of thing. So I'm grateful. People ask me all the time. They're like, why are you so? What did somebody ask me the other day? What I can't remember the word they use, but I'm just like, man, I wake up every day very grateful because I get to do this for a living, and I know how fortunate I am. So that kind of makes it easy to wake up feeling that way.
Yeah, I had something similar happen. I was in real estate for about 15, 20 years. Then I won't bore you with it all, but I got pretty sick, and I'm still sick with a chronic illness. So 10 years ago, my wife got a job down here in Texas. We're from Iowa. Mm-hmm. And so I thought, well, what can I do? And so I started doing this and the Lovecraftian magazine and all the different projects associated with it. But if I hadn't gotten sick, I never would have done that.
Right.
And I do remember thinking, I was making a lot more money than I make with Lovecraftian, but I enjoy Lovecraftian so much more. But I remember thinking when I was in real estate, as much as I loved helping people find the house that they wanted and the looks on their faces when they found that perfect house, and feeling like I had something to do with it, I didn't feel like I was doing anything creative, and I really wanted to.
Yeah,
so,
I can see that.
Yeah.
That usually finds a way one way or another. But if you hadn't gotten sick, who knows?
Yeah. So I was thinking about Chasing the Boogeyman, which I really, really enjoyed, by the way. And I can see from your Amazon reviews that I'm certainly far from alone in that. I don't know, kind of in my mind, I'm putting it, for me anyway, in the same category as I wrote down a couple of titles. Not that they're anywhere near the same plot or the same style, but it's that small town horror when someone's younger or a young adult type thing. And the titles I came up with was Summer of Night, The Shadow Year by Jeffrey Ford.
That's a great book.
Yeah, it really is. And he's such a nice guy. I love Jeff. And Boy's Life by Robert McCammon. Another good book. And very magical book. And
I've probably given more copies of Boy's Life as gifts than any other book.
Oh, you have? Really?
Yeah, it's probably Actually, recently, I think I said that the book that I've probably given more copies of is Prayers for the Dying, but you know what? I was wrong. It's Boy's Life.
It is amazing. I would, we're here to talk about you, but I would just, as an aside, anyone who has not read Boy's Life by Robert McCammon, you really should do that. It's really amazing how it seems like almost each chapter is kind of a short story, but
Yes.
overall it arcs into one large mystery and is resolved at the end of the book.
Yeah.
It's
Rick,
amazing writing.
I think, yeah, I was going to say, I think Rick's as good of a storyteller as we have. And
Yeah.
The neat thing about Boy's Life, besides what you said, it really is this: if you have any creative spark in you whatsoever, it's such a magical book. And it's the one book where I'm never, sometimes there's certain books like Stuart Onan, Prayer for the Dying. I've given that as a gift to quite a few people. It's a powerful book. It's really subtly just, soul crushing book. So there are certain people I wouldn't give that book to. Boy's Life is the one book where I never have to worry about it. I'm just like, you know what? The worst that's going to come out of it is they're not going to be as captivated as I was. But if they're not, I feel sorry for them because they should be. But yeah. It's one of those, I think it's a near perfect book. People always ask me, what's your favorite book? And my favorite book for personal reasons is It by King. But Boy's Life is 1A. It's right. I mean, it's 1B. It's right there. And,
Agreed.
It's great.
Well, he hooked me right from the beginning with what was it, the introduction or forward or whatever.
Oh,
where he's talking about magic and a lot of adults lose that magic when they grow up. And I'm like, oh man, this is exactly something that I need to read.
Yeah.
So, I've read it about 10 times since then.
And churched out of you. And yeah. No,
churched out of you and spanked out of you. And
I gave signed copies of that book to both of my sons, as probably a little bit too young, but they have them on the shelf, and Billy's read his and loved it. And, hopefully Noah, after, he's too busy with school now, but once he's finished, hopefully he sits down and reads it.
There's some really tragic scenes in that book and passages in that book, but there's some really hilarious ones too, like the hornets in the church, if you remember that chapter.
I was just going to say that, isn't that the name of the chapter too? Hornets in church or wasps?
Something like
something?
that. Yeah.
Oh,
I was laughing out loud.
Yeah, I was laughing with tears rolling down my face, which doesn't, I mean, I'll belly laugh as good as anyone, but not like that. It's so funny you said that, because it's all the stuff that the aunt or the grandmother, whoever's yelling, shit fire, hellfire. Oh, good stuff.
But anyway, the last book that I was actually going to mention was It. That small town horror, growing up kid or young adult thing, and obviously that's your number one for personal reasons, but it's a great book. It just really is. It's a door stopper. It takes you a few weeks to get through it, but it's worth it. So
yeah, it's something. I mean, and Summer Night's a great book too. It is. I've probably read that 3 or 4 times, and it's in many ways it's kind of more poignant than the others, and has kind of a somberness that runs through it, and it's a different kind of story, but it's so good. And I'll be honest, I've always wanted to write a story, a novel set in my hometown, and I always thought it would be a big fat scary book like It or Summer and Night. I've said that a bunch recently, because it's just always, I kind of had it tucked behind, my ear, thinking, one day.
Yeah.
But yeah, it didn't work out that way. It ended up being this, Boogeyman book, and completely different animal.
What do you think it is about small town horror that fascinates readers and, TV watchers, movie watchers so much? That kind of story?
I can only speak, for myself.
Sure.
But I think, to kind of go off of that, I mean, I grew up in Edgewood, was a small working class town, blue collar. So yeah, when people say, what was it about Stephen King's work that you gravitated to? right away. And I think it was those small towns in Maine with the multiple characters and learning so much about the town, because, I think I had a writer's brain from a really early age. So, whether I was fishing down in the Bush River and watching the trains run over the trestle, I was that kid who was looking up and thinking, all right, where are those people going? Are they going to work? Are they running away from something? Are they running towards something? I was the kid who'd be walking home from the big wiffle ball game or the football game and seeing lights behind windows with curtains closed, thinking, what's behind there? What secrets do they have? That kind of thing. So when I discovered Steve's work and books like Salem's Lot and many of the others, I felt like I was at home. I felt like he was writing about people I knew. And people I saw passing me on the street, and people I walked past in the grocery store. So there was that immediate connection. And I think for some people, I think many people have that exact same connection, but I think some people who don't live in the suburbs, who don't live in a small town like that, it's like watching the Wonder Years on television. You can't help but find it charming and comfortable and appealing in many ways. Whether you live way out in a rural area and you don't have neighbors, or you live in an urban setting, or whatever it is, there's definitely an appeal to a place where everyone knows your name, and that's a good thing, as opposed to a bad thing. And where there's friends on, both sides of you, that kind of thing. And you've got your little, neighborhood watering holes, and you've got your, drugstores where you can buy baseball cards, and the gas station, all that stuff. So, I think that's where I came from, that immediate connection. And I think it probably served a lot of other people too.
My wife grew up in a place like that, and in a smaller town in Illinois. And she describes it basically as being Mayberry. She loved growing up there. She played with kids on the street. Everyone felt safe. I'm about 5 years younger than you, and she is too. So she grew up in the 80s, as I did. And is that your experience growing up in Edgewood, in the real world?
Absolutely, yeah. And I mean, and people, it's interesting because Edgewood is kind of sandwiched between two military bases, Aberdeen Proving Ground and Edgewood Arsenal. So you do have a lot of families that kind of, they lay down, they kind of, hit town, and they're only there for 5 or 6 years, and then they leave. Their dad or their mom get, restationed and moved and transferred. But there were a lot of full-time, residents. I mean, everyone on my street was, I knew them from the time I was 4 until the time we all went away to college or moved away.
She was in the same house her entire life growing up until she went to college.
Same thing. And that was, but yeah, I mean, we played kick the can, and we played, football in the big field by the haunted house. And we played flashlight tag and all those things. And like you said, we were able to, stay out late at night. Our parents didn't have to know where we were all the time. We left the house early in the morning. We came back for lunch, and then they didn't see us until dinner. And after dinner, we were gone. And if we were going to stay way out after dark, we had to make sure we told them. But, to roll into the house all sweaty and covered in grass stains and, at 9:30 at night was a normal thing. And we spent the night at each other's houses and snuck out and ran around the neighborhood at all hours. And it's interesting because the point I was making is it's very much a working class town. It's got its wrong side of the tracks. It had its, crime and that type of thing, but it was still very much, a movie producer who read Chasing the Boogeyman called it Wonder Years meets Silence of the Lambs. And it kind of was that, it was kind of like if Kevin Arnold ran into some bad stuff, but
you just made me think when you were talking about coming home at 9:30, made me think of Summer Night Again, who was it, Kevin's mom? He would be so embarrassed because she'd yell, Kevin, to get him back to get him home.
Two of the guys I wrote about in the book, the Andersons, Brian and Craig, the brothers, man. Their father, Fred, who I wrote about in the book also, he would just lean out the door. He wouldn't even bother yelling. He would just lean out the door and put his fingers in his mouth. And he had this ear-splitting whistle that you could hear. And I'm not kidding. You could, we're like, of course, in typical like boys' life, exaggeration. We're like, you could hear it for miles.
Yeah.
But whether we were in the middle of a ball game, or whether we were in the middle of, pitching pennies, or climbing, a drain pipe onto the roof of the elementary school, whatever it was we were doing, they heard that whistle, they were gone. And I can't tell you how many football games and baseball games and board games that they screwed because, they would just drop. It didn't matter if they were, up to bat, last inning, bases loaded. They heard that whistle, man, and they knew they better get home or
time to go.
They were in trouble. So yeah, they just literally, boom, they were gone. And we would just sit there and cuss and scream. So yeah, it was that kind of neighborhood. It was, it was a great place to grow up, and it wasn't without its issues. And it's in its current state, it's a lot tougher. There's a lot more crime. There's a lot more lower income housing, and they're trying to figure things out. They're a lot of people are down on it, but that's the interesting thing. Even when I was there, I talk about this in the book about how parents from nearby towns, they're like, oh, you can date my daughter, but I prefer you to Edgewood tonight. And I was like, okay, sure. And then I take them right to Edgewood.
Ignore what they said. Yeah.
Yeah, they're like, yeah. Guess what? We weren't going.
Smile and nod, and then do whatever the hell you want.
Yeah, I'm like, now you convinced me, and we're going home. So yeah, but it was always that way. That people looked at it. The reality is, it's a little, it's not as in good shape. But you know what? There's a good core of people who are working hard to get it where it needs to be.
Well, I get the sense talking to you, and I certainly get the sense talking to my wife. We're about to hit our 25th wedding anniversary. So we've discussed this many times over the years, of course, but that feeling of being very happy that she grew up that way, that you grew up that way, and and happy that you had that opportunity to grow up that way.
I mean, I always tell people, and I've done this, like when I go back and I talk to students at Edgewood High School several times, and some other groups. And I always say, the pride that I take coming from Edgewood, where you kind of had to, you learned a lot of things growing up there. You learned that hard work was kind of the secret, and you really learned the definition of loyalty, because we bonded together, and we're proud of where we came from. And the example I always use is I grew up a couple blocks away from John Check, who was an actor, and he right in the middle of college, he dumped his classes and moved out to Hollywood. And before he knew it, he was in, a bunch of films, and he ended up doing That Thing You Do with Tom Hanks, and some really big films. He was on the front of Vanity Fair, the cover. Nice. With, so he did his thing, and years later, we got together and we formed a little company called Chesapeake Films, and we wrote some scripts together, and we produced some things. We did a couple episodes of Fear Itself with Mick Garris. We did a Masters of Horror. We did a Ed Gorman book. We almost got From a Buick 8 from King, produced, came close probably 3 or 4 times. And it just didn't happen because of budgetary reasons. But
I think I read recently that they're going to do a movie or TV series on From a Buick.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a series. Yeah. That's the heartbreaker for me. Because it's probably the best script we ever wrote, and like I said, it came close. But so anyway, we would be out in the waiting room waiting for these huge meetings with because of John's place in the movie industry. We got some really high level meetings, and he was nervous because this was his world. I was never nervous because I'm like, what the hell? I write books and stories, and but the funny thing is we always used to say, we would kind of just go in and do our thing. And like I said, we were really fortunate. We had 7 or 8 things produced in a short amount of time. And our kind of punchline was always, what the hell do we have to be scared of? We're from Edgewood. And I can't tell you how many times we'd be walking down the hall to the big meeting, and I'd be elbowing him, he'd be elbowing me, he'd be slapping me in the back of my head, and we'd be like, yeah, we're from Edgewood. And it carried us through a lot, growing up there kind of gave you a different kind of confidence. It wasn't about shiny sports cars and country clubs. It was about, we've been tested before, and we've done the work, and it's not always pretty. But, we understand what you have to do, and that is just get the work done, and eventually you'll succeed.
So talking about the book a little bit more, the first thing that I really fell in love with, besides the concept of the book, which was what got me interested in the first place, was on page 26, the rubber band man, and I was like,
Right.
oh my God, this is so cool. And I wanted to ask you, and I think I know the answer, if that was a real urban legend in your town, or if that was something for the book.
It was real, and it just
cool.
as I described in the book, it was something
Wow.
that I heard from my older sisters. You know, my sisters, I grew up, I was one of five. My brother they were much older than me. I was definitely the mistake. And I talk about this in the book. So my older brother was military, so he was gone. He would come home and visit, on leave. And then I had three older sisters. And so, I look at that and I think, well, I tortured them. They took good care of me. I paid them back by torturing them, telling their date, she'll be right down. She has diarrhea, things like that. But
no, she can't talk on the phone right now. She's in the bathroom. That kind of thing.
She's with another guy. I'll tell her to call you back. But yeah, one of the really cool things I got from them, besides, borrowing their books to read, I read Sidney Sheldon way at an age that you should not be reading Sidney Sheldon and a lot of those other writers. But yeah, they told me about the Rubber Band Man, and I went out and told all my friends, and then we're finding out from other people, oh yeah, I've heard about him. And yeah, so it was a real thing. What I describe in the book didn't quite happen that way. That's a little bit of fact and fiction.
Yeah.
The one place where to this day, I believe I saw him, I was shooting baskets at Edgewood Elementary School. They had a fenced in, 2 full court basketball courts, and we used to play kickball and wiffle ball in there and pretend it was the Green Monster and all that. And I was shooting baskets by myself at dusk, and it was getting dark. And to this day, put me on a lie detector. I think I saw him. I grabbed my basketball, I ran as fast as I could, and I got out of there. I didn't stick around to get a better look, but it was this gangly, tall, creepy ass thing, and I could feel it in the air, kind of, that kind of came shambling out of the woods. And if it was a hobo or whatever, which we had a couple of, it looked like it was 7 foot tall and barely had any meat on its bones. So yeah, so that's that section of Boogeyman. It's a lot of fact and a tiny bit of fiction mixed in from time to time. All the other stuff about my youth actually is pretty damn accurate.
Yeah. It really doesn't matter if it's fact or fiction, because, we're reading horror fiction. That's what we do as readers. But there's just, in your book, far more of a baseline of fact for a fictional book than there is in most horror books, is maybe the way to put it.
Well, and that's how I ended up with me as a character, because I was like, I'm gonna have a problem faking this, which is what we do. We pretend, we make shit up, we make believe. So yeah, at some point I realized that so much of what I wanted to put down on paper really happened, and it was me. It happened to me, or I was there, I saw it, I heard it. That's what ultimately I was like, I'm not gonna be able to fake this, so I'm gonna have to make it me. And for a guy who's very behind the scenes, who doesn't go to many conventions or shows, and there are people right now laughing as they hear me say that, because they call me a recluse and a hermit. It was a weird decision to make, and my agent kind of was like, what? And but I don't think it was as huge in my brain as it eventually became, once I verbalized it to my agent and others, that I did it. It was just the way, and I tell people that, and it's like, it's not a cop at it. It's just the way the story needed to be told. And it was the way that I could tell it in the most honest, authentic way. It was, what, I'm not even going to pretend this time. It's me. And I was there, I moved back home for 9 months, and it was a strange time, just because I was kind of on the cusp of real adulthood, and I was, going to get married and move into an apartment and the whole thing. But there I was, living in the house I grew up in my bedroom, staring at the same window, at the side yard where we always played. And it was just a really creatively ripe time and emotionally ripe time.
And you had supportive parents that allows you to do that.
Yeah,
Sounds like.
yeah. Oh, my God bless them. They, particularly my mom, she was like happy as can be that her boy was home and she could make him dinner again. And every morning, what do you want for breakfast? And I'm just like, gosh, Mom, you don't have to do this. And yeah, no, I was blessed with a great family, and I always tell people, I'm like, look, don't get me wrong, I didn't put this stuff in this book, maybe another one. I'm like, we were dysfunctional in many ways, and we also, we suffered a lot of loss in my family, and a lot of hardship, throughout the years. I always tell people we were kind of like the Kennedys without the sex and the money, because we had some stuff happen. But it didn't happen during this time period, so I can't, I didn't really need to go through it. But a tight family, ups and downs like anybody else. But yeah, very fortunate. I've had people say, oh, you kind of painted such a rosy picture. I'm like, well, you know what? If I wrote about 3 years earlier, it wouldn't have been as rosy, and a couple of years later, it wouldn't have been. But during this period, the dark stuff that was happening was outside of our family. It was in the town.
Well, you don't need me to tell you this because you've been writing for a long time and you've got a lot of fans, but I'll say it anyway. I just think this book is really, really well written. I really liked, in the beginning of the book, you kind of give two histories of the town. You say every town has two histories, and the one history, and you can put this better than I can, is all the facts, and when it was established, and why the military base is there, and so on and so forth, and when the railroad tracks were laid down,
Right.
and so forth. And then there's this network of memory and history and networking between all of the people who live in the town. So,
Right. Yeah. And you know what? I kind of copied that off some true crime books where they kind of set the table for you. And they, it took me a while to learn that with true crime books. Sometimes they start and they're slow to get going. It's the history of the town. It's the history of the townspeople. It's, and you're thinking, well, wait a minute, I bought this book because of these murders, or I bought this book because of these missing kids or whatever. Let's get to it. But what I learned is, man, these writers, they know what they're doing. And by the time you do get to the action of the story, you're invested, and you know what the town's like, what the people are like. So the impact is just that much more significant.
Yeah, you have to care. They're doing that so that you care about the characters, and then not just cardboard characters.
Right. And I actually added that little section in the beginning of the one chapter where I said, before we get to it, I want to kind of open up. I want you to understand, the people and the places that I grow up with every day, and get a feel for this before you understand, the impact that this series of murders had on my town, and the people that live in it. And yeah, I remember thinking I'm going to get editorial notes. They're going to want me to cut down that section. They're going to want me to spread it out throughout the book. And I did. Fortunately, I didn't, because I remember thinking that's one thing I'll argue about is, I'm asking you to be a little bit patient, give me 20 or 30 pages.
Right.
And so far, yeah, I mean, there's been a handful of people who, have given it, mediocre reviews and commented on that, but most people have loved it. And, I can't tell you how many people have keyed in on this scene or this scene, whether it's the bicycle jump ramp, bike ramp scene where the girl, Melody jumps and I see my first, brawl, or it's bombing car. I had
the greatest day of your life till then.
Yeah, pretty much. It's so funny. She commented on Facebook the other day. She lives down in Florida now, and she said, "Yeah, I still have a scar on my shoulder." And I'm like, "Thank you for not getting mad at me for writing that." And her brother was like, he commented like the next day, "Yeah, I just read it. I just read that scene." He. And so many people, the other day, someone messaged me and said, "I'm so glad I no longer feel alone," because he said he always felt so bad because he was so into bombing cars with, dirt clogs and snowballs and stuff. And I'm like, no, trust me. We were like, we were like I teased in the book. I thought I was gonna have to go to rehab or something because it became an obsession, and the amount of joy that we derived from it just wasn't healthy. And nowadays,
is Rich on drugs? Well, kind of. He throws dirt clods and snowballs at cars. We may have to do an intervention So
one of the girls who I live next door to now, she's no longer a girl. She's a woman. She's in her 20s. She's like, yeah, I've never really done anything, just flat out mischievous and wrong like that, And I'm like, well, we're going to bomb cars. And my wife's like, you are not. You'll get shot nowadays, if you try it. But so that section of my youth, the rest of the story is about fighting to not lose that innocence, and not only in myself and in my friends, but in the place.
yeah,
And I felt like it was important to go, and plus it was just fun to write. I mean, that again, this book more than anything I've ever done is an example of writing something for yourself first and foremost, and being as honest as you can, and hoping it finds an audience. But if it doesn't, that's okay, because I had the time of my life writing it. And that's
I love that motivation.
Yeah, and
I love that.
I've told a lot of people, I'm like, that's why the book came so fast for me. 90,000 words, I wrote it in a few months, and obviously it needed, further work, but the first draft just came lightning fast. And it was fun. I mean, my mom's been gone since 2001. My dad's been gone since 2007. But for those 3 months, they were right there, and I was eating my mom's cooking, and I was hearing their voices, and I was, in a lot of those scenes, I was writing exactly, the things they did, and how they felt, and how they talked, and the others, I was doing my best to make up how I felt they would react or act. And that was fun. And my friends, again, I'm still friends with a lot of these guys, most of my childhood friends, actually. But they're scattered everywhere. And for this time, man, we were all still in the same neighborhood, where you opened your front door, or you went out your back door or your porch or whatever in the morning. And you didn't know what the day held for you. You didn't pick up the phone and call them most of the time. You went outside and you waited till you saw somebody, and then let's go to so-and-so's house. And no, he can't, he's got a doctor's appointment. All right, well, let's go over here instead. And that's a great, those were great times to grow up.
And everything just sort of happened.
Yeah.
You went with the flow. So
yeah, and if you were bored, you sat on a curb and popped tar bubbles or threw rocks, and eventually that led to throwing something at a car or whatever. Or you went and we were like, we'd go down to the pool hall and look for change, and and play Space Invaders, as opposed to now everybody would just get on their phone, or they would go, let's go play video games. We didn't have that, so we found our way. And yeah, it was just a neat time to grow up.
What you said about I want to stay on your book, but just very briefly, what you said about a town losing its innocence reminded me of that book that I recommended to you, The Monsters We Make.
Oh yeah, about the newspaper.
Yeah, about the newspaper boys disappeared in Des Moines, where I grew up. If to anybody out there listening to this, read Chase to the Boogeyman. But when you're done reading that, check out The Monsters We Make.
It's a good duo.
Yeah. But it was the same thing. Des Moines kind of lost its innocence. We were like, whoa, wait a minute, we thought it was safe here.
Well, and that's the interesting thing. I think you really hit on something, is a lot of people, unfortunately, now they don't have that contrast, because where they're growing up, there's, even in some places that used to be good, that used to be safe, that, that's a key word, is they don't grow up kind of with that safety net. So the contrast, if this happened, it's kind of a short jump from, a bunch of drugs being around and people getting shot in gangs or anything like that, which has certainly worked its way out into the suburbs and into the more rural areas. But, back then, and where you're talking about, growing up where the newspaper, the newspaper carriers, were being taken, it was such a contrast, because we did have that innocence of, you could, I mean, I think about spending the night at my friends' houses, and we would literally wander the neighborhoods all night, come home exhausted, sleep for 2 hours, and then get up and go home. Nowadays in these places, including Edgewood, it's not a good idea to do.
Yeah. Danielle tells me all the crazy stuff she would do, and she was a well-behaved kid. But she always, pulled the classic, I'm spending the night at Michelle's house, but really they were going somewhere else.
Oh yeah.
And her parents always fell for it. You made me think of something, and I called my wife at work. I texted her. I said, give me a call when you got like 60 seconds, because I want to relay this to Rich, and I want to make sure I have this right. But so I really like the Rubber Band Man. Um, I'll just read a few sentences. If you listen to the whispers, and it goes without saying that we sure as hell did, the Rubber Band Man was almost 7 feet tall and painfully thin. His arms were like twigs and hung stiffly at his side. His hair was midnight black and short and bristly. His eyes were black slits, and his mouth was a grim, straight line. No one had ever seen his teeth. No one, that is, whoever lived to tell about it. And then you go on to describe a fictional experience that you have with, at least I think it's fictional with him.
Right.
But so in my wife's house growing up, there was the Gunny Sack Man. So the Gunny Sack Man, and I wrote this down because I wanted to get it right, and she's on the phone. Danielle's mom is, how can I put this in a nice way, was a great mom, and she was crazy in a good way, kind of like my wife is, you know.
Right.
And she said, you know, like when we were in kindergarten, first grade, and you know, kids would be over with us, and you know, it'd be nap time. Now I'm just going to read what she said. I wrote it down almost verbatim. So they're napping, and her mom says, if you put your feet on the floor, the Gunny Sack Man who lives in the attic will know that you're awake and put you in a sack and take you away.
Oh, God.
So you remember those attics where it's just like a square in the ceiling and the stairs go down. Yeah. So it was that kind of attic, you know. It wasn't a where you walk up the stairs attic. So every time she heard them giggle, she knew that they were trying to, you know, get up, put their feet on the floor. She would take a broom and bang on that door, and they would scream and run back to their beds because they thought the Gunny Sack Man was coming after them.
That's awesome.
She's like, if a parent did that today, I don't know if they get away with that.
It'd be a big social media story, and
yeah, exactly.
Know. Well, and those were the days, man. That's the same thing with like the Boogeyman. I did research, and it's like, you know, the Boogeyman, you know, the earliest uses was to scare kids, you know.
Right.
They would say like, be careful, the Boogeyman's going to get you, and that kind of thing. And again, you know, the Gunny Sack Man, the Rubber Band Man, it's like, that was my point. It's like every town had one, you know, every town had a haunted house, and every town had their legends. And usually one of them was scary as hell. Usually another one was a ghost somewhere, you know, a spirit because of an untimely death. And, you know, our town was the same as all the others. You know, we had our own, you know, personal stories. And, you know, I think about the X-Files, you know, and then that's why the thing was so beautiful, especially the earlier episodes for me, is because that's what they did. They kind of went around and looked for proof that these things existed. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, you know, the Boogeyman, you're friends with Stephen King.
Mm-hmm.
Is there any relationship? How do I want to say this? Is the title have anything to do with his short story?
No, it really, you know, my original title was just simply The Boogeyman. You know, that was another thing. In addition to always wanting to write something set in my hometown, I always wanted to write a book simply titled The Boogeyman. When Ed Schlesinger at Simon & Schuster and Gallery Books, when he bought it, and, you know, he pointed out that because of the true crime format, because of what I was trying to do with the book, he felt like it needed a more expansive title. And, you know, we came up with a list of 8 or 10, and Chasing the Boogeyman was one of his additions to that list. And I was like, yeah, you know what, that really works. So we stuck with that. But yeah, no relation. It was, you know, to me, the Boogeyman was just that you know, it was Michael Myers, and it was all the rest of them. It was the Gunny Sack Man and all the rest of them. It was just simply that faceless, you know, nameless evil that was preying on, you know, this town, that town, you know. And yeah, because like I said, because of the true crime format, we changed it. But, you know, my original idea, what I originally wanted to do with the book was I wanted to Blair Witch everyone. Totally. I wanted to, you know, when I sold it, it was called The Boogeyman, a true story of small town horror. There was no novel on the front. There was no disclaimer page. and there was no afterward. And my idea was to pass this book off as real, to plant like a 1992 era, website online somewhere and have it be updated to a certain date and then stop. So it looked abandoned. I wanted to plant some fake newspaper articles online. And then Billy and I, we talked about doing a documentary, kind of like they did for Blair Witch, where they cover the background of the legend. And I wanted to do that and bring in some of the same people from the photos, to have like home footage of them and home footage of Super 8 footage of some of the victims and that kind of thing. And I wanted to just, like I said, I wanted to Blair Witch it and really screw with people. And Simon & Schuster's lawyers were like, no, we can't do this. And hence the novel.
Yeah, you did get me several times. You got me first in the foreword.
Right.
And I'm like, whoa, wait a minute. Is this real? It's very effective. And you got me a couple huh?
People Googled the victims and people Googled certain events.
Oh, what I Googled was a couple of books that you mentioned. Like, like this one is good. This is a good resource. You should check out this book. And I Googled it. I'm like, there's no such book,
What's great is I referenced two books. One was very real and the other one was totally made up. And the second later where I did some of the serial killer thing and I changed some figures, even in the history thing. And I remember telling my wife, it's just like, well, you know what, man, I'm playing this card. I got to believe in it. I got to play it all. I got to play this hand all through the entire book. So even though I might have had some accurate figures in the beginning, I screwed with some of them because I wanted some of them to be fact and some to be fiction. And like all that stuff in the background of the town, with the exception of, the big train robbery and one other incident, they were all accurate and real. Like I said, except for a few numbers. But that was it. I wanted people to Google, and even with a novel on the front, there's a lot of reviews where people say, I stopped and I Googled this girl's name, and if I had my way, they would have found something when they hit search, but it didn't work out that way.
I want to ask you if this is a real experience, because it's really, really beautiful. That you said there are two special memories of Edgewood that remain forever imprinted on my soul. And the first one was when you were 5. Was that a real experience?
Yeah.
It felt real.
Both of those were real, and both of those were things that I had never really written about. Both of those were kind of things that I always kind of carried with me.
Yeah.
The first one, I really fit the book because I think for that 5-year-old who, like my dad retired from the Air Force when we moved here to Edgewood. So unlike my sisters and my older brother, they were all over the place: Texas, Spain, California, South America. They were a little bit of everywhere. I was actually born in Caracas, Venezuela, because that's where my dad was at the time, at an air base. So I had done some moving, but I was small enough that I didn't really retain, remember a lot of it. Right. But it fit the book because I do remember those Christmas lights, and I do remember just that feeling of wonder. And, I live here, and, this is my dad, and I'm okay. I'm safe. This is where I'm going to be. And then the other one where I just kind of had that moment where I realized how big the world was and that I wasn't always going to be here with my friends and living under the same roof with my parents. And, eventually some of these people won't even be here, on earth anymore. That happened too. And it was, that was kind of my dear moment from Stand By Me, in the Stephen King film, where I never really talked about it, never wrote it down, but it felt like it, I felt like this was finally the story that it belonged in.
More bittersweet than the 5-year-old experience. I just want to read this one sentence. It really affected me. It's just really beautiful, Rich.
Thank you.
You wrote, "I live here. I remember thinking," and this is 5-year-old you. "I live here. I remember thinking, this place is my home, and it's magic, and I never want to leave."
Yeah.
And of course, once again, I thought of Boy's life.
Right.
So I love that, and I wanted to tell you that I love that. I mean, I'm sure you'll hear that from other people, but it's wonderful.
Yeah, somebody read a longer quote from the second memory to me recently, and I told an old classmate this yesterday. I said, what's interesting about Chasing the Boogeyman is, it was written for me. It was, they were my experiences, but seeing the local reaction to the book be so overwhelmingly positive and just, you know, people kind of reveling in the memories is what I didn't realize is I was writing down their memories too. And a lot of shared, you know, treasured memories for all of us are in the book. And that's, it almost becomes a celebration of that time and place for us. And that's been a really neat, unexpected outcome, you know, because I remember telling my older son, Billy, he was worried, and Billy is not a worrier about creative issues. He was worried. He's like, Dad, you can't try to pass this off as real. You're going to get sued. You're going to like make the property values in Edgewood go down because everyone's going to believe that, you know, the serial killer, you know, was born and raised there and blah, blah, blah. And I remember telling him, I'm like, Billy, you know, we don't know whether 50 people are going to read this, 500 people or 50,000. I'm like, you know, I hadn't sold it yet. I just finished it. And I was like, you know, it's just this little campfire story I wrote for myself. So now to have it, you know, hit a much wider audience, and a lot of that audience be, you know, people who grew up there, it's just been a really neat experience. And it's something I never thought about ahead of time. So it's you know, a lot of people said you took good care of our town, and that's those words.
I was about to ask that question. If the people you grew up with reading the book, if they came away feeling positive feelings about it.
Yeah.
It sounds like they did.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's good.
I mean, and then they're like, and then damn it, you know, scared me to death. I've seen a bunch of posts from Edgewood people who are like, I took my trash cans out last night and I was terrified. And I just, you know, I'm one hand I'm giggling thinking about that, and the other hand I'm like, oh, I'm sorry.
Speaking of magic, I have to ask this. And we're bringing the quality of the show down, but I have to ask this: is the Craig Anderson defecation incident true?
100% true.
Oh my God!
That is the most asked question. That and the bike ride.
Is it? You knew I was going to ask that, did you?
Yeah. The Brian and Craig. Yeah, and many people have asked me that if that's true on both, you know, professionally and personally. But
how did Craig react to this?
Oh, you know, Craig, I say at the end of the book, Craig's no longer with us, unfortunately. We lost.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I missed that.
But yeah. But Brian, you know, he was happy that I kind of, you know, I kind of.
Craig is immortal now.
Yes, that's what I was going to say. I immortalized the guy, and the best was when my sister texted me and she said, "Craig did not do that." I'm like, "Yes, Mary, he did," and I'm like, and it happened exactly like that. You know, it's like, this is the day he became a legend. You know, I've never seen anything like it, but I was right there. I was standing on the curb. I saw it with my own two eyes. It was 90-something degrees. Hanson Road is not a lonely road. It is a well-traveled. It's the main road through Edgewood, and it's well-traveled. And somehow it happened right in the intersection of Hanson and Tupelo. And they were always fighting, but this was the
worst thing I ever threw at my sister was a coffee cup, and I'm glad I missed. But yeah, I didn't go any further than that.
Yeah, the knife incident with those two in the leg, that was true too. But yeah,
oh my gosh.
The dropping his shorts right in the middle of Hanson Road and doing that. And my buddy Jimmy Cavanaugh was with me, and we'll never forget it, you know, and we knew right at that moment we would never forget it. We're like, you know, we didn't say it, but we knew this will be with us forever.
On my deathbed, this is going to flash before my eyes.
What's funny is when Craig passed, I wrote some notes for the service for his brother to say, and just for the family to have. And you know, I talked a lot about the kind of kid Craig was, and he was a tough kid, and he was misunderstood at times, and he definitely marched to his own drummer and did his thing. And I'm like, but for me, you know, I'll always remember him as, you know, the kid that would always give you the last piece of gum in the pack, you know, because he was just that kind of a guy. But I always, and I remember thinking it then, I always wanted to first say, to relate the, you know, he once took a dump in his own hand and chased his brother and threw it at him like a monkey in the zoo flinging poo, you know.
But he was still a generous guy.
Yeah, he was great.
So he'd even share his poop with you.
Yeah, and he never flung at me, you know. So
no, yeah.
No, I mean, I would have loved if he flung it at his brother on many occasions, but it was just once.
You know, it occurs to me I should have asked you to do this right at the beginning, but for those who have not yet read the book, could you maybe give like a couple of sentences or a paragraph spoiler-free synopsis as to what this is about? I know we've been talking about, so maybe they could infer, but
Yeah, it takes place in the summer of 1988.
Mhm.
I'm a freshly graduated college student, and like I said earlier, I have this 9-month period in front of me where the plan is to move home, save some money, so I'm not spending it on an apartment, for my future wedding 9 months in the future. And I have started work on the first issue of Cemetery Dance magazine. I am, submitting my short stories. My head is firmly planted in the horror world, and suspense and thrillers. And it's just like I said, it's an interesting time. There I am, about to get married and have my own place and do all these things, but I'm living in my bedroom, and I'm looking out the window and having dinner every night with my parents. And there's a series of murders that are happening in the town, and that part is fictional. But I think I do my best to play it as real, and in a different way than a normal novel.
Right.
The book is set in a true crime format. There's a series of photographs at the end of each chapter, because photographs always carry such an impact for me when I'm reading a true crime book. And I also wanted to kind of add some authenticity. I wanted people to flip the photos aren't advertised anywhere on the book cover, on the back cover, in the promo copy. So I wanted people to get to that last page of a chapter and all of a sudden see.
That is exactly what happened to me.
Yeah.
I was like,
that's
whoa, there's pictures in here.
And I wanted people to kind of forget that it said a novel on the front. And by the time they got to the second chapter and they saw the face of this angelic teenage girl who they just read about being stolen from her home and murdered. So I wanted that kind of authenticity to kind of stack itself on top of each other until, story.
It sort of reminds me of a film that I really love, Lake Mungo.
Yeah.
Paul Tremblay and Nadia Wolkin and I recently did a podcast discussing it because all three of us love that movie. My point is that it's a faux documentary, but to enjoy it, you go in and you sort of turn that switch off in your brain to really enjoy it, and you pretend it's a real documentary.
Right.
So, same thing with your book. There's so much in that book that is, the foundation is true. The characters are really the characters, but now here comes the faux documentary part, the faux crime novel, or part, and true crime part. I mean,
and where the idea for the murders came from is, and I talk about this in the book, there during the late 80s in Edgewood, there really was a male, an unknown male, intruder. He was breaking into homes, usually through open doors and windows.
Because the Phantom Fondler.
The Phantom Fondler. The newspaper really did call him that. There's newspaper articles, all about him. And what's interesting is, in my brain, and my memory's pretty good, but for some reason, I remembered this only happening maybe a half dozen times. And when I went back and did some research, I found out it happened over 30 times.
Wow.
And they never caught the guy. Later on, he was arrested in Baltimore City for an unrelated crime. And he admitted to it, and the evidence matched. And so they knew he was telling the truth. But at the time, it really did begin to do the town what happens in Chasing the Boogeyman. People started locking their doors. People started buying extra locks, floodlights. People, there were rumors that people were buying guns, and you better not go here. They were setting traps in their yards, and the whole thing. And I played golf with a bunch of Edgewood guys, 15 other Edgewood guys, like 3 weeks ago. Some guys I hadn't seen for a while. And what was interesting is we were riding to the course with, we had 4 of us in the car. And one of them's like, yeah, that happened to my next door neighbor when we were talking about the Phantom Fondler. And it was just like, it was there. It was right in the neighborhood. And that's where it came from. My brain just naturally thought, because that was happening when I was home during this time period. And I remember it was a creepy time. But at the same time, because I'm this horror freak, I'm like, I felt, it was kind of like Scream. I felt like I was in a movie.
Yeah.
But my brain, immediately went to, what if it escalated and he wasn't just, caressing their hair or their leg and then running off when they woke up? What if he was, actually, murdering these women? And that's where the Boogeyman came from.
Did you know who the killer was when you started the book, or did that sort of work its way as you were writing?
That kind of worked its way out. I had a few different ideas. But that one kind of just, and the way it happened at the end, I based that on a real case that actually unfortunately happened to someone who I know really well. the way they got the DNA off the sweat, off the arm rests and the whole thing. And
Yeah, that was brilliant.
yeah, I mean, yeah, well, that's the nice thing is it wasn't, I took that from a real case. So it wasn't brilliant plotting on my part, but same thing with the, I've had a lot of people say, this is such a unique, format and a way to tell a story. You've invented this new genre. And I'm just like, you know what, it's completely accidental. It's not like I wish I had an outline from the beginning that said a brilliant idea by Rich Chizmar and it showed the whole thing.
That's the title of your next book.
Yeah. So I could be like, I knew from the start that this was going to be different. And instead it's just the same way that I ended up becoming a character. That's, it was a very organic process. And it's just
like, you folks can bronze me now. I'm ready,
Yeah, that's the good. I'm never afraid to admit that. Yeah, and unfortunately, it's funny because with most of my books or stories, they're like, "Oh, I love this," and I just kind of sit there and I go, "Yeah, that was one of those accidents that just revealed itself to me. I had no idea that was going to happen until we got to it." And,
I know some authors they'll basically like say thank you, and others like Paul and Laird Barron, they're not afraid to say, yeah, I got it from here. I got it from here. I got it from here, but I put my own twist on it.
right.
They're not afraid to say, hey, I'm influenced by what I read and by what I watch. We all are.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I've never been. Yeah. I mean, I've always said, you're going to find some Stephen King in me, and not because I'm trying, but because that's really what I grew up on. And that's just like people, it's interesting. Steve was the first person to say, in the quote, he mentions Ray Bradbury. And I was like, huh. And I asked a couple other people who had read it. I'm like, you feel that way? And they're like, oh yeah, I almost put that in my blurb, that kind of thing.
You're talking to a Ray Bradbury super fan. If you can't see, but me straight ahead is my whole shelf of Ray Bradbury books.
Oh, cool.
So yeah, I would agree.
I got it from, I knew I purposely kind of did the homage in the Halloween section, in the beginning, that was obviously my Bradbury. I was there in that moment and feeling it. But not so much the rest, but you know what? It was his happy little small town, and that weird things invaded, and
Greentown, Illinois.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, and I've never been afraid to talk about influences or any of that. I'm like, I've always said, you know what, and even this, sometimes when the early buzz, was really going, and I'm sitting here thinking, and I said it out loud as often as I could, guys, this is really just like kind of a campfire story. It's kind of like that spooky, creepy campfire story. It doesn't reinvent the wheel. And I was the kid who, in the Myers house, just like I talked about in the book, I would tell a school story. My friends would be like, Chiz, stop, please, come on, stop. And at some point I would look over my shoulder, pretend I saw something, scream and take off running. And then boom, here would come my friends, and we would get there and everybody would be pissed off, and then we'd be laughing. And, I'd do the same thing 2 nights later to them. And somehow they'd be scared all over again, instead of thinking, he's just yanking our chain. But yeah, so that's what it was. I took those, those creepy stories I told back then, and I just made it a little bit for grown-ups.
One other thing I want to say about this book, there's a lot of levels to this book. And one level is losing a parent, losing a child. And you've got 2 boys, correct?
Right.
And I've got one, and he's the world to me and my wife. And was that part hard for you to write, or were you able to disassociate yourself from that? I think that's the worst thing that can happen to a parent.
No, I'm with you. Yeah, people have said, what are you afraid of? And I'm like, you know what? I don't like snakes, and there's not. I'm not a fan of heights and those things. But you know what? I can deal with it. I can grab a snake and get rid of it. I've done that in the house and all that stuff. But yeah, losing a child or something, happening to an immediate family member like that is and like I said, I've had a lot of loss in my life, but not within my core family here. And yeah, so in some ways it very difficult to write. On the other hand, a little easier to put into words, the significance and the impact, and maybe trying to capture some of the poignancy of what it would feel like to lose somebody, and remembering the little details that somebody else wouldn't remember, and missing the things that that maybe somebody else who's never experienced that loss would even think they'd miss. But yeah, so yeah, those things were definitely, played in my head, and drew some from experience of others. But yeah, no, I'm with you, man. I can't think of anything worse.
Yeah. In the latter part of the book, I think this is okay to ask you because it's in the book itself. You talk about having cancer, and I'm assuming this is real.
Yeah, that was true. Just like in the book when I was 29 and then 30. Yeah. So all that stuff's true.
Let's see here. I'm reading from your book. With my family and friends at my side every step of the way, and God watching over me, yes, I do believe He had a hand in my recovery. And yes, I do know that my mom is smiling down on me as I type these words. I somehow managed to once again beat the odds. This past July marked 25 years of living cancer-free. And here's the part that really got to me. Even now, many friends tell me that they believe I was saved so that one day I could become a successful writer and share my stories with the world. I always thank them for their kindness and counter them with the same response. I believe I was saved so that one day I could become a father to my 2 boys. That really hit home with me because no matter what successes I have, the one thing I never want to screw up is I don't want to be a bad father. That's number one. And so I got that from you from reading that passage as well.
Yeah, I mean, that we weren't, I think I talk about this in the book, we weren't supposed to be able to have kids because of all the chemo I had. They gave me like the heaviest you could get for 12 weeks. And they there's other ways you can do the old sperm bank and all that stuff, which, we were prepared for. And they said, you're not going to, be able to have kids naturally because of, everything you went through. And then it did happen naturally. And, all the nurses were Billy, my oldest son, Billy, was the miracle baby. And it was just, a big kind of celebration. But yeah, Billy's named after my father, and very blessed, not only just to survive it twice, but to be able to do that and then have Noah come along. And they're both, healthy, really smart, good hearted, kind kids, young men. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you are a successful writer, and successful publisher, and several other things at least. But to hear from you that your most important success is being a father, I just truly respect that.
Thank you. Yeah. No, it's, what, it's, my wife, Carol, she'll tell you, even when, back when we were, engaged and probably dating, I'm just, I was always just, number one, I had, like I said, I had older siblings. So I was Uncle Rich at a very early age. Loved babies, loved kids. And I always knew, I really wanted to have a son and name him after my father, and for that to happen. And then to be gifted this second, little boy. And, yeah, it's just always, it's funny because I was a workaholic and just, and then, my wife's pregnant. It's a miracle. It's awesome. And then I'm thinking, wait a minute, I'm going to have to move my books because I don't want to mess with my books. And I wonder how it's going to work with my work schedule. And then, Billy comes along and it's like, I'm ready to retire at age 30, whatever I was, because I'm like, I just want to play with the kid. And then, yeah, so no, it's definitely been my best, my favorite role, and my favorite job, and a privilege. And the boy, we're all close and very lucky. And it's one of the things I just told Noah. He went to college last week. I'm like, look, you're going to run into people who aren't close to their family, who aren't close to their dad, who don't have a dad or a mom. And I said, you're going to realize that, everyone's not like that. And I said, so, be kind and help those people out and realize, how lucky we have it, not how lucky you have it, but, how lucky we have it. And, like I said, man, I'm with the risk of all of us joining hands and singing Kumbaya. I'm a pretty freaking lucky guy on every level. And that's
but I do think it is important to acknowledge those things, even if it does sound sappy.
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah. Well, that's
I
the
really
thing.
do.
It's like, man, I've felt that way. Getting sick and almost dying probably helped, with that perspective. But I've kind of always had that perspective in my life, even though it's a weird dynamic because, even though I kind of see the darkness in the corners and all that stuff, and I always have, I've always felt very fortunate to not be there. And so, yeah. I mean, I think, trust me, when people begin to read my work, it opened their eyes, because they're like, Rich, you were like this optimistic, big goofy kid, and you write this stuff. And I'm like, if I didn't get it out, I probably wouldn't be who I am. So
Well,
yeah.
so let's, for those, I can't imagine there's too many, but for those out there who haven't read any of your books yet, and let's say they start with Chasing the Boogeyman, they love it. Let's just briefly talk about some of your other books. What would you like to mention? Like, you've written several books with Stephen King, right?
Yeah,
Wendy's.
we wrote. There's a trilogy. Gwendy's Button Box is a novella that I wrote with Steve. And then the second book, I thought I was writing with Steve, but there was a miscommunication there, and he was just saying how much he loved the idea, and for me to write it, not that he was going to come back and rewrite it after me. So that's how Gwendy's Magic Feather came about. And then Gwendy's Final Task, which is the third and final book in the trilogy, was actually his idea, and he was excited about an idea and wanted us to write it together. So that'll be out in February.
That's great.
A short, it's more novella called Widow's Point, about a haunted lighthouse that I wrote with my son Billy, that was then turned into a low budget film. That one's kind of neat. And yeah,
Widow's Point, I read that about a year and a half ago.
Yeah, and that was fun. I mean, to write it with my son when he was 19 years old and probably a sophomore at Colby College up at Maine, and just to have that experience together was beautiful. And then a year later to be standing on a movie set with him, watching the characters that we made up come to life was a neat experience. And it's made him want to do this and write. So we'll see what happens.
I saw an interview, and this is got to be a great feeling for you, but I saw an interview online where Billy said that he thinks it's so neat that he has a dad like you that does this for a living, and that's got to feel great.
Oh, it does. It does. And it's neat to hear the stories that I didn't know about that he tells. He told a story in an interview about how, in our older house for a while, I had a bunch of paperbacks stacked up in the hallway that, in the bedrooms, next to a bookshelf, waiting for another bookshelf that never came. And he always talked about how he always flipped over certain covers because he didn't want to see them as he walked by because they scared him. And I think back and I'm like, I'm a pretty, neurotic guy. I probably flipped them back over so they were cover facing. And then, 2 days later, I'd find it cover down. And I'm like, now I found out why. The poor guy was terrified. So yeah, no, that's neat. I mean, people say, what's the favorite, what's your favorite book? What was the best experience? And Stephen King is my literary hero in many ways, kind of a literary, father figure. So, writing those books with him, beyond belief, beyond a dream come true. But it has to be Widow's Point, because to actually sit down there with my son, who, I can't tell you how many scary stories and books we read when he was younger and all through his teenage years. So to be able to do that with him, see his name on the cover with me is it's going to win every time.
That's great. And if Stephen King keeps at it the way he is, he's gonna really hit it big someday, I feel.
He's amazing. He's I mean,
I've not met him, but he's friends with Paul, who I'm friends with,
right,
and he's friends with you, who I'm just now getting to know. And from every indication, he seems like a hell of a nice guy.
He is. And writing with him was just this, like I said, I'm a big dreamer, you can tell, but I never dreamt that big. And that was kind of I use that line a lot in press without realizing, but because it was true. It was just, I never in a million years fathomed that. I dreamt that maybe one day I'd get lucky and I'd publish him and all of that. But to become friends with him and then to have him trust, me enough to write with me, because that's a big difference. He'll tell you, I'm friends with lots of people, but I've only written with a few. That's just a neat thing to kind of hold on to in those days that you need something to hold on to, And yeah, very, he's everything you would want him to be. He's funny, he's crazy smart, he's so well read. He recommends books to me, and I'm like, Steve, where the hell did you find this? Or he sends me these videos, on YouTube or something. And I'm like, but yeah, just a very generous, kind guy.
Yeah, it's funny because I visited mom at the rehab place yesterday, and just sit and talk with her for a couple of hours, so kind of break up her day. And she's like, so who are you interviewing tomorrow? And I said, his name is Richard Chizmar. She goes, do I know who he is? Well, not really. I said, the closest thing I can tell you is, I don't think you've read his stuff, Mom. The closest thing I can tell you is that he's written a couple things with Stephen King and their friends, and she's 75, and she's like, wow, really? She's like, well, she goes, are you going to interview him someday? And I'm like, well, I'd like to, but it may happen, it may not. She goes, well, you're kind of getting closer, and I'm like, yeah, I guess I am. But
it's funny because you're saying your mom's 75, and it's like, there are times when I wish my parents were still alive to see those books, and because
I bet. Yeah.
My dad flew in World War II and was just the most kind of practical. He just wasn't someone who was real easy to impress as far as, showbiz or glitz or anything like that. But he knew his writers. He was a huge, he's the one who introduced me to the gold medals, and he read a lot of early spy and crime, and he read King and the others. And the fact that I was publishing Steve during his lifetime, and that, he invited me up to a celebration party at Tavern on the Green in New York, it kind of tickled both my mom and dad to no end. There was just that, see Stephen King. And if they had been alive to see me write with him, I just think they would have been, over the moon. And it would have been, like I said, my dad, he wasn't playing it cool. He was just, he'd kind of been around the world and seen everything and done a lot. And it wasn't easy to kind of put the stars in his eyes. But when it came to Stephen King, and I'm, you got to use both names, Stephen King, they were impressed.
Well, it sounds like you had great parents, and I'm sure you miss them.
I do. And that's one of the great things, like I said, about this book is I kind of got to introduce my parents to a lot of people, and it was neat. It was neat for my family too. They all are like, it was nice to visit with mom and dad again.
I have a couple questions from the people who are watching live. But before I do that, since we're on the subject of Stephen King, do you have a favorite Stephen King book?
It'll always be it, no matter what. There's a lot, I think parts of Hearts, and I always say this, there are parts of Hearts and Atlantis that I think are as well written as anything he's ever done. I love Salem's Lot. I love 11/22/63. Billy's reading that right now because I finally forced him to. But I will say this, I have to do a radio thing in like 7 minutes. So
sure.
We might
I know you need to go.
Yeah, no, I didn't mean to rush you, but yeah, we should probably do the questions.
All right. I'll just do the last one. And someone by the name of Patty, I'm going to not get her last name right, Patty Hoke. Heck, I loved reading Chasing the Boogeyman. I'm from Edgewood, and it brings back all the good memories of the places I hung out with my friends. So I thought you would like to hear that at least.
Yeah, no, I mean, and I've heard that a lot. Thanks, Patty. And it's like I said, I never thought about that ahead of time. I never thought, but that was my big people say, what was your big kind of discovery through this book is I wrote it from a very personal place. But what I'm realizing now is I was writing down our memories for a lot of people, and it's neat to hear from them. It's neat to know that for most of them, I've done their own memories justice, and kind of reminded us, all how lucky we were.
Yeah. Well, I will let you go. I really appreciate the time that you gave.
Oh man, I enjoyed it. I could talk for another half an hour. I've got to do this radio show at 4:30.
Maybe I can get you on sometime next year or something.
Anything you want, man. I'd be happy to come back.
All right, man. Nice to see you.
Thank you, man. I appreciate it. I enjoyed that. All right. Bye.
Thank you. Bye. Matt, anything you want to cover before we go?
I'm really glad I could help.
Yeah, you were a big help. I'm
going
actually
to-
not being sarcastic because just seeing you sitting there was great moral support.
Okay, so I'm gonna end up. I ordered the book. So
You ordered the book?
Yeah,
There you
so
go.
great interview.
Yeah. I hear the Audible narration's really good too for those who like Audible. I know that's not you, but a lot of people are.
I'll check if they have a button on AOL for it.
Oh, Christ. Let me tell you, folks, I get an email from Matt today, and let me just pull it up here. No. Yes. Okay, here it is. Matt asks, is it at 2 p.m. or 3 p.m.? And then his auto signature is sent from the all new AOL app for iOS. And I'm like, are you kidding me? You're just asking to be ribbed by all of us.
Mike, I just can't help it if you're not modern.
If I'm not modern, okay.
Yeah. If you're not up on all this technology and AOL stuff, go ahead,
Oh, yay. Well, I'm glad you're here to guide me. So yeah, it was fun. He's a nice guy and very talented guy.
Very, very friendly and approachable. I wish him all the success.
Yeah. Yeah, we had a heck of a time getting together. Several failed tries. One, he accidentally double booked. I think one of his kids was off to college that Sunday, and
life's complicated. It's like a lot of moving parts for everybody.
Yeah, my mom fell, but some people are jerks about it, and those are the people that I'm like, okay, if we don't make it, if I don't get you back on, I don't care. But this guy sold a lot of books, and yet he sent me like 3 or 4 emails asking about my mom. I just respect the hell out of that. So,
like I said, he seems extremely approachable. Probably the kind of guy you'd bump into at a ball game and have a conversation.
Hector wants to know, how many AOL CDs do you have around the house?
AOL CDs? Well, I have to go into my archive collection where I've got it like under it's pure nitrogen, not oxygen, so that they don't degrade, and I have to count them. So I can't answer that off the top of my head.
I wasn't listening.
I didn't think you were.
Have you watched any of Chapelwaite yet? Speaking of Stephen King.
I don't know that I want to, because I think what's going to happen is I'll get 2 episodes in and it won't be available to me for any more of it. You know what I mean?
It's $7 for Epics.
$7
a month, I think.
Per month. Okay. But see, the thing is,
and you can cancel anytime. You know what?
We dumped cable was to try and save a few dollars.
You are saving a few dollars. You're looking at this the wrong way. When you have cable, you don't have a choice with all the stations that you get, right? But when you do, like a smart TV or streaming and so forth, it's a la carte. You can do what you want, and you can quit whatever you want to quit.
Okay, no, here's a better comparison, Mike. It's when you
I don't think so.
When you go to a sushi restaurant and you want
it's $5.99 a month. I just looked it up.
You want the good stuff, you get what's called the omakase. It's the chef's choice. And the chef's choice is often over $40.
This doesn't relate at all. I'm not
$90 and up, $150 and up. If it's like, how
Matt,
are you going to go?
If I remember correctly,
California roll.
If I remember correctly, the first 7 days, or even the first month, I think, of Epics is 99 cents, and then it's $5.99 a month after that. So,
what was going to drive me to rent this, to go ahead and sign up, is if the viewers on Easy Movie Night decide they want to watch it when it's all dropped, then I'd probably sign up and show it on movie night 2 episodes a week.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Because that's what we did with The Outsider. It was quite enjoyable.
Well, I've
That's
seen
what
the
we did
first
with, that's
episode.
what we did with Lovecraft Country. It was like 2 episodes a week after it had dropped.
What the hell? Kenneth says, "Is this the old guys arguing show now?"
Well, yes,
Who,
it is, and fuck you.
yeah, who are you calling old? He's old. I'm not old. Just because I have gray in my hair and I have to walk with a cane half the time doesn't make me old.
You know, look at me. I still
Just
look
kidding,
very,
you, Kenneth.
I look very youthful.
You look younger than me, actually. Oh, then he goes, "Because I can watch this for hours."
Okay, what's that say about you, Mr. Desperate?
Now, this is great entertainment. It says that he has good taste. And by the way, if anybody wants, yeah, get off my lawn. If anybody wants to hit that $sign and give me a little tip for today,
Yeah, here, don't
can,
play
I
the pony.
appreciate it. And if you don't want to or aren't able to, that's fine too. So just remember, I'm extremely poor. I'm kidding. However you can support it, and if you can't, we're going to be here for you anyway. So to the best of my ability. All right.
I think I'm going to, just FYI, I'm probably going to start a Lovecraftian book a day again each day, starting.
Oh, you're going to torture yourself again.
But it's mainly just to kind of finish up one last go around. What's new? What I haven't talked about?
You know what? Could you send me the links to the Lovecraftian books today on Facebook? Because I would like to share them on the big Lovecraft Easing page.
No sweat.
Yeah.
So I also have.
I know a lot of people would be interested, and I know
a Facebook. I'll also send you one for the movies we've watched on movie night.
Okay, great.
Yeah. Because I think it's kind of fun to go back, and if you look at it, we've watched some great movies. I mean, there's some dogs in there like Beast of the Water, but we've watched some great stuff.
What did you guys watch? Was the last one Bubba Hotep?
Yeah, because I was up in Chicago this past weekend.
Right. Bubba Hotep, that's a great movie.
Well, it was actually, I was shocked how good an actor Bruce Campbell is.
Oh, man, when you told me, remember you told me you hadn't seen it, and I said, "Run, don't walk." Yeah, it's good.
He really showed some skill in terms of like showing, really depicting a persona. You know, who knew the king as a person? Most of us didn't, but we knew his persona. But then also showing some depth of emotion underneath that. You know what,
DeBronzo, both of you get off my lawn, except for Kenneth. Kenneth just tipped me, so he doesn't have to get off my lawn. Thank you, Kenneth. I really appreciate it.
Hey, DeBronzo, don't you have to work today, you lazy bastard?
Don't you?
I got off early.
Oh.
I already went to work. I was at work before 7.
So, the rooster woke you up and you went to work.
Right.
Yeah, and you got off early just to do this, didn't you?
Yeah, sure, that works.
Okay. Thank you, Kenneth, not just for the tip, but for saying you love the show. I really appreciate that. And I kid Matt a lot, but he's a big reason why this show is so enjoyable, I think, too. So yeah, Chapel Wait. What else do we have to talk about? Anything else?
I think we'll probably be talking about something this Sunday, so you can tell the folks what we're seeing this Sunday.
Well, what are you playing Saturday night, first of all?
Okay. It is.
Oh, and I do have an announcement when you're done with that.
It's a movie called Intersect. It was shown last year at the Lovecraft Easing Film Festival.
All right.
I don't know if it's any good, but it's set at Miskatonic University, where some students invent a time machine and accidentally summon something.
Fucked up everything.
Right. I don't know if it's any good, but I think it is kind of like right up our alley.
So the announcement is this. As you guys know, probably like 4 times a week, we have events going on. And if you go to the Lovecraft Easing website, the very first blog entry right now is the events blog entry. but I also put it on a page. If you go to the site and you click on, you got all those links above, which I refer to as tabs, but they're really just links. And in the second row, depending on how big your browser is, you'll see one that says events. If you click on that, basically starts off with a guide to events at Lovecraft Easing. And what I do is I start with, okay, here's what we do. Starting Sundays at 6 Eastern time is the regular Lovecraft Easing podcast. Okay, we all know that. And then the next thing is Tuesdays at 9 Eastern is the horror old time radio. So that'd be tonight at 9, 8 Central. The next thing we have is Thursdays at 9 p.m. Eastern time, which is sort of Patreon night. So we alternate. Every other Thursday night, we do a Patreon podcast. I do a Patreon podcast with somebody, and that's only available to Patreons. Kind of like that layered, true life scary experiences. That's a good example.
That is worth getting the Patreon for in and of itself.
Thank you.
I was just a viewer. I wasn't participating in the interview. I could listen to that guy talk about his life for the whole night,
Mm-hmm. Well, like I said, we were on the phone for 2 hours. I don't know how we got into it, but he starts telling me all this stuff. I'm like, Larry, this would be really cool to do a Patreon podcast on. And he's like, yeah, that'd be a lot of fun. So that's what we did. So if you're a $5 and up Patreon, you get access to all that. It's not like it's a lot of money. That's every other Thursday night. Of course, you don't have to watch it on Thursday nights. It's kind of like the Sunday show. You can watch it later, or you can listen to it later when I put the audio on the Patreon site. And then the alternating Thursday nights is for $10 and up Patreons. And that's when we just do a Zoom call that's not broadcast, not recorded. And you guys can just hang out with us panelists, and we're all just be nerds together, for lack of a better description.
What's this wee shit?
You're a nerd too.
Oh.
You're just an old nerd.
Oh.
And then last but not least, my friend Matthew Carpenter, Saturdays at 9:30 p.m. Eastern time. He calls it 8:30 p.m. Central time, but they're both the same. Lovecraft Easing Movie Night, hosted by Matt Carpenter. And I link to the cast. If you look at that page, I link to everything. So it should be fairly easy. I wanted a page where you could go to it and you go, okay, here's all the events that happen every week at Lovecraft Easing. So if you like horror old time radio, or you think you might, join us tonight at 9 p.m. Eastern, 8 Central, 6 Pacific. And it's just like you won't see us, you're just listening to the show, but you can text chat along with us while we listen to the show. Sort of like movie night with Matt. So tonight I'm playing a mystery theater called I Warn You 3 Times. It's a really good one, and like I said, come for the story and stay for the 1974 news broadcasts. They're actually pretty cool. I love listening to them. That and the commercials. I think there was a rule. Every commercial had to be a song, had to be a ditty, back in the 70s. I don't know why. So I think that's it. Am I missing anything?
Nope. Well, there's a lot to enjoy. And if you've got any ideas of things we should do, send me or Mike an email, because there are a lot of creative people out there and we want to hear what you got to say. Who knows what a germ of an idea may grow into. Yeah.
I mean, I may not think of everything. I probably won't. I might not think of, okay, here's a great creative person out there that maybe I should be interviewing. Let me know. lovecrafteasing@gmail.com. So, you know, I like Matt says, I welcome suggestions. And
we offer equal opportunity snark.
absolutely right.
Says
We don't care
company
who you
policy.
are. We'll be glad to make fun of you, especially if you're over 65, which you are, Matt, right?
Only look at.
This Sunday, we've got Joshua Demarest, if I'm saying Joshua's name right. And if I'm not, Joshua, I'm so sorry. If you go to the website and click on podcast, you guys probably all know this, but you can scroll down and you can look at the upcoming guests. And I keep that updated, you know. So if there's a change, I change it right away. It's never out of date. So got some good people coming up. Catriona Ward wrote a book called The Last House on Needless Street, which is
Great cover.
fantastic, isn't it though? I don't know if it's out yet. This is an art, but it's really good. And I mean, Ellen Datlow's coming up. Victor LaValle's coming up on October 3rd.
That's
Peter Watts.
Reviewing. Oh, can you please tell the people so they can plan now? Do you have any ideas for your annual Halloween broadcast? Because I really look forward to that.
I do. In fact, I'm going to put it. I'm very tired today, but I'm going to put it on the schedule tomorrow. I just finalized it. Excuse me. I just finalized it with Jeff and Scott. And what we are doing is, I'll put it on the Patreon page, but I already have it on my Gmail calendar. It is going to be Tuesday, October the 26th at 8 p.m. Central, 9 p.m. Eastern. In other words, that's the that's the same time slot as the Horror Old Time Radio, but that night we will do our Halloween show. And it'll be me and Scott and Jeff, and I've invited Laurel Hightower.
Oh, how nice.
Who wrote Crossroads.
Yeah.
If you haven't read Crossroads, it's a novella, and it packs quite a punch. You really should read it. And she's responded that she'd love to do it, and I just haven't had a chance to get back to her with the details, but I'm 95% sure that she'll do it. So
right.
So yeah, we do. Like, October 26th, 9 p.m. Eastern.
We've just had your 10th anniversary of founding the e-zine or something like that.
In February.
But we do have, it's like, I know we're still relatively a young organization, but there are traditions, and this Halloween broadcast is one of them.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, you're one of the guys that you are the main guy that got me into thinking that way. That, hey, this is a tradition. You need to do this every year, Mike. The movie night is a tradition, and Mike, if you're too busy to do it, I'll do it. And all snark aside, I really do appreciate that about you, Matt. And I also appreciate the fact that you refer to this as we've been doing this for 10 years. Me, you, Pete, Rick, all the others. Yeah, I don't view it as, this is my baby and that's it. It's all of us. So it's a community. So if I sound sappy,
you the listener are welcome to participate. Just send us your suggestions.
Yes, and a $50 bill.
You write the suggestions on the $50 bill. Actually,
you don't have to send a $50 bill. Just send the suggestion along with a tip in these. Or actually, even better,
just send the $50 bill.
Even better, just PayPal it to me, because YouTube takes a cut out of this. Yeah. So,
all right.
Although it is nice, it's a nice little chunk of change to help me when I'm behind on bills. So anyway, thanks for being here, Matt.
Take care, Mike. I gotta go.
All right, this was not our normal time, so thanks everybody for watching, and I'll have this on audio soon, and we'll see you on Sunday. Thanks a lot,
Bye-bye.
guys. Bye.